I'm back with another episode of Recruiting Blitz. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. As always, we've got weekly content here on YouTube, and subscribing gets these videos dropped directly into your feeds. Um, Coming off Nebraska's win over Wisconsin this past weekend, Nebraska gained some positive momentum with recruits, with future transfer portal targets, and has set themselves up well to close out this 2025 class and get a jump start in the 2026 class here in the next few weeks. It was the last home game for Nebraska, kind of last recruiting opportunity, on-campus recruiting opportunity for the year. There's a chance they could get a visit or two or a couple guys. Obviously transfer portal, when that opens up, they're going to get some visits there. But for the most part, this is the last big visit weekend. And Nebraska took advantage. They did a really good job with the 2026 regional targets. Still feel good about where they stand with some guys. We'll get to that here in a second. In 2025, there was a couple of names we had an eye on to see if they would make it back into town, as Nebraska's either working to flip them or keep them in the class, so on and so forth. The big name, if you were following our work over at InsideNebraska.com last week, Aiden Manutai. Nebraska was hoping to get the Cal three-star safety commit on campus this week, this past weekend. Nebraska's been pushing for a flip. There's been word from the last few weeks, over the last few weeks, that Nebraska was trending to pull that flip off. Donovan Raiola spent the second bye week in Hawaii and did go to see him. And there was some positive momentum there. But we reported last week around Tuesday or Wednesday that Cal was making some efforts to kind of keep their class together. Justin Wilcox is kind of had some rumors about his job security. Saturday's win over Stanford pretty much secures him for another year. They have a four-star quarterback they're trying to hold on to. They see that guy as a program changer. Oregon's trying to flip him away. Georgia's also trying to flip him away. So Cal got him. His name's I don't know how to say his last name, but it's Jaron Kiawe. But they got him on campus this weekend, and he brought Aiden with him to Cal. So both those guys were at Cal on Saturday. Manutai did not ultimately make it to Nebraska. And just talking to some folks on Cal's end, on Nebraska's end, coming out of the weekend, confidence is dwindling in Nebraska's chances of pulling off that flip. Is the door closed on Nebraska? I wouldn't say so. I do think, I think the win on Saturday, I think the momentum that Nebraska's built on and off the field this year. I think the push that Donovan Raiola, Dylan Raiola, John Butler, Tony White, etc. have made is having an impact. And it's just ultimately, Cal has just done a really good job since landing his commitment over the summer, to keep him in the boat, to keep him from taking other visits, and keeping him committed. So as of right now, I'd say this is swinging back towards 50-50, arguably even 60-40 in Cal's favor to hold on to his commitment. But again, at the same time, there are folks on Nebraska's end that do still have some confidence that Nebraska can get this done by signing day. We'll see. I'm always I'm bearish if that's the best way to put it. But I never feel good about chances of flipping if you can't get the kid on campus. And Nebraska last had Aiden on campus over the summer for an official visit. They haven't had him on campus all fall. And pretty much, with signing day next week, I don't know what kind of opportunity they'll have to get him in town. So at this point, I'd say my personal prediction, I think he sticks with Cal, but I can definitely still see a world where Nebraska pulls this off by December 4th. We'll definitely keep you updated in the loop, and we'll have updates on this recruitment. Bit of a roller coaster here at the end, as signing day approaches. On the flip side of things, Nebraska did get Jeremiah Jones, their three-star athlete, commit back in town. They withstood a strong push from Mizzou. Mizzou had him on campus 3 times over the last few months. They offered him at the end of July, got him on campus at the end of July, got him back on campus in September, and then got him back on an official visit earlier this month. Nebraska got him in town for the Colorado game, and they got him back in this last month. On Friday, he announced he's officially shutting down his recruitment and sticking with Nebraska, and then he showed up the next day in Lincoln, back on the sidelines. That's a big deal for Nebraska. Jeremiah, in my opinion, and you talk to people that cover the program, people that cover recruiting at a national level, scouts, evaluators, they all think he's one of the bigger sleepers, not just in the class but in the country. He's a guy that plays some wide receiver, can play some tight end on the defensive side of the ball, can play safety, can even play some rover, could eventually move down to linebacker. He's as versatile as they come. He's as productive as they come at the high school level, playing both sides of the ball. Out in Murray, Kentucky, a super productive player and one that could fit in a multitude of roles for Nebraska. Sounds like, a part of Nebraska's pitch to keep him in the class was getting him started on the offensive side of the ball. So he'll likely start his career in this wide receiver slash like tight end type role early on. But I could see a world where down the line, he ends up flipping over to the defensive side of the ball because I'm not alone in saying this, but I know a lot of people believe his ceiling is higher on the defensive side of the ball, and I think ultimately, like I think eventually, there's a world where he gets to the defensive side as well. But that's about the 2025 class. I guess, talking about 25s, others that came into town. Dawson Merritt was back on campus for the first time since flipping from Alabama. He's been a vocal peer recruiter. I'd expect him to maintain, a recruiting presence even once he enrolls on campus. It's good for Nebraska to get him back in town. Again, I know people noticed he was in a sling. Not super concerned about that injury. His season's over, and he's just kind of monitoring something. A lot of guys are banged up here at the end of a long high school football season, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And as far as the 2025 class goes, I mean, what's left beyond the guys we've mentioned? Manutai, Jones. They're still trying to flip Cortez Mills from Oklahoma. Ultimately, that depends on what happens with Oklahoma's and with that coaching staff search, as they kind of try to look to replace their offensive coordinator, could make some other offensive changes. But I'll say this, I think Nebraska's performance offensively on Saturday is something they can go and show Cortez and kind of show him and say, hey, this is what you can do with the offense. And I think that's a pitch that can work, that can resonate with him. The opportunity to catch passes from Dylan Raiola, to play alongside a friend in Ja'Cory Barney, and be a feature piece of the offense. I think it's a big deal to a lot of these young recruits that Ja'Cory Barney broke the freshman Nebraska freshman record for receptions. That like there's opportunities for young pass catchers in Nebraska's offense, and I think that's resonating. In the same vein, I think Nebraska can put together a nice closing pitch here for Michael Terry, just with this offensive performance on Saturday, with some of the momentum they're building on and off the field, with some of their goals long term. The latest there is sources on Texas's end still think Texas is in the lead. People on Nebraska's end have some confidence, but ultimately, I still think this is going to be Texas's recruitment to lose. But Nebraska's made it very interesting, and it's getting to the point where we're closing in on signing day, and the closer we get, the more it feels like a toss-up recruitment as we kind of close in on him making a final decision. And that's about it. Jordan Allen from Buford didn't ultimately make it into Nebraska, hasn't been able to make it in, and likely is going to either stick with his commitment to Louisville or potentially flip to Georgia Tech. I think those are really the only two options for him at this point in the cycle. And that's really the last 2025 target that's been out there for the Huskers at this point. I think the attention now turns to the transfer portal as they put the finishing touches on this class. Obviously, Chase Loftin as well, keeping an eye on him, his commitment to Florida State, and what he ultimately ends up doing. He's expected back in Florida State this upcoming weekend. We'll see if that visit happens or not, and kind of what his status is over these next few days, because Nebraska feels confident about pulling off another flip or two. We'll just see if and when those two things happen. Turning the page and looking ahead to some of the 2026 guys that were in town, Nebraska's, I've said this before on here and in other places as well. I feel good about where Nebraska stands with Hunter Higgins, the 4-star defensive end from Maize South. He's a guy that over the summer and in the spring, Nebraska was involved in a pretty big battle with Oklahoma for. Nebraska kind of jumped Oklahoma in his top schools list, or in his in whatever order he's got in his mind. Nebraska jumped Oklahoma over the summer and kind of entered the season as arguably the leader in that recruitment. Obviously, there's some other programs involved. Now some Big Ten programs. Wisconsin's involved, Michigan's involved, a few others involved. But I really like where Nebraska stands. I think the play from the defensive line this year has really stuck out to him. I think he sees an opportunity to kind of be to line up all over the line. He kind of sees what guys like Kai Wallner are doing, Keona Davis is doing, obviously what Ty Robinson's doing, and kind of sees an opportunity to kind of play all over Nebraska's D line line and be disruptive. So that's one to keep an eye on. He had a good visit. His third trip to Nebraska this season, had another good visit. JJ Dunnigan, he's a Kansas State legacy from Manhattan, Kansas, was back on campus. He stated outright after the game, Nebraska's rising up his list. I think Kansas State is going to be really tough to beat there. That's just a recruitment where, they have a lot of advantages, being the hometown team, being the program he grew up around, obviously winning on the field as well. And so it's going to be tough, but I think, Nebraska's a school that's well positioned to potentially pull him away from the Wildcats if he ultimately decides to leave the state or kind of leave his hometown childhood favorite team. And those are two regional guys I just keep an eye on there. I think Nebraska did a really good job with those two over the weekend. Jase Reynolds, the 2026 linebacker from Elkhorn North. I thought Nebraska did a good job there as well. They've had him on campus a couple times this year. I think and I think eventually Nebraska lands that commitment. I think they stand in good position to keep him home. And he's had a good junior season, and I think kind of fits what Nebraska likes at linebacker, what Rob Dvorak's looking for. It would be a nice piece. I think Nebraska's got a good vision for what that 26 linebacker board looks like. Kasen Thomas, another one in the region, 3-star from Sioux City, Bishop Heelan, and an athletic linebacker that also plays running back for his high school. I think Nebraska's ideal dream pairing in 2026 would be a linebacker trio of Keenan Harris, Kasen Thomas, and Jase Reynolds, or at least two of those three. It kind of feels like those are the guys at the top of the board for Dvorak and Tony White and that linebacker room right now, looking ahead to 2026. Obviously, they have their three committed for 2025, and so he's already turned the page and getting a head start moving forward. Nebraska had 3 2027 quarterbacks on campus this weekend. The headliner is Trae Taylor, the 4-star out of the greater, right just outside Chicago. And he's the number 33 prospect in the country per Rivals, top 10 quarterback in the country also per Rivals, and a guy that's back on campus for the second time this season. He's technically seen Nebraska 3 times, was at Ohio State when Nebraska played Ohio State. So he's seen Nebraska 3 times. He's seen encouraging performances from them each time. The first time he was on campus wasn't a great offensive showing. This time around, got to see Dylan Raiola in action, got to see Dana Holgerson's offense in action, and that made a big deal. That made an impact on him. And actually, as I'm writing this, I'm recording this on Monday. What I just said about Jordan Allen just committed to Georgia Tech. So he's going to Georgia Tech, not Louisville. That just broke as I'm recording this. So just a quick update there. But yeah, that was not happening for Nebraska. Bit of an unfortunate one. Nebraska had that hometown, the Buford connection, wanted to make that happen. But ultimately, Georgia Tech's able to keep him home, keep him in the Atlanta area. Good win for the Yellow Jackets. I'll say that much. He's a good returner, and and a nice win over Georgia Tech as well for the Yellow Jackets. Anyway, where was I? Oh, 2027 quarterbacks. Yeah, but Taylor had a good time. Really enjoyed his visit. Nebraska also had Jameson Purcell, a left-handed, southpaw quarterback out of Maine South, also in Illinois. He's a guy that's had a nice sophomore season, has some buzz and has gained some attention from coaches around the country. And yeah, he visited over the summer and landed an offer, returned over the weekend. Really enjoyed what he saw from the offense. He feels a fit just because they run a lot of similar stuff to what he runs in high school, and just enjoyed the fan base as well. I think Nebraska did a really good job this weekend of showcasing the fan base. There's a number of recruits that went and saw that game at Memorial Stadium and got to experience one of the more electric environments we've had at Memorial Stadium this season. Besides the Colorado game, most people believe that recruitment or that Saturday game against Wisconsin was the most energy Memorial Stadium's had since then. And so he got to experience that, and the recruits in town got to experience that environment. And then afterwards, the Nebraska staff actually encouraged a lot of the recruits to make the short trek over to the Devaney Center to see Nebraska volleyball sweep Wisconsin. So see the fan base in action again and get to see kind of the stage that Nebraska athletes have when they play in Lincoln. And I think that resonated with a lot of guys. Guys coming to the state from out of state and kind of don't realize just how big of a deal Nebraska football and Nebraska athletics are to the fan base. So that made a big impression on a bunch of guys, not just Purcell, but guys across the country. And then Nebraska made a new 2027 quarterback offer. Ben Musser, he's out of Prince Avenue Christian. Let me double check the name. Apologies on that. But yes, Prince Avenue Christian School, same school as Brock Vandegrift, the quarterback over at Kentucky, coached by Brock Vandegrift's father, and a guy that's kind of rising amidst his sophomore season. He had an enjoyable time in town as well. Really enjoyed the trip. So Nebraska's kind of starting to expand this 27 board. With 2026, you have Dayton Raiola committed. 2027 is really where Nebraska needs to take a big swing and wants to make a big swing and land one of the top arms in the country. And in a way, Dana Holgerson's offense, if they keep this up, if he sticks around in Lincoln, and this Dylan Raiola and Dana Holgerson pairing continues to work out for another season, it can sell itself. Dana, well, we've talked about his recruiting ability. Doesn't necessarily need to be him, but him, leading the recruitment, but just his offense alone, the play of the offense, can do a lot of good for Nebraska on the trail. Flipping back to 2026, just one more name I wanted to touch on before we get out of here. Nebraska had a somewhat of a surprise, I guess, or a couple of names I want to touch on. Let's keep this going for a bit. But a name I did want to touch on: 2026 cornerback Chaston Smith. He's a number 90 player in the country per Rivals and a top 10 corner in the country, also number 7 corner in the country per our rankings. And he visited Nebraska and landed an offer. Was offered on the field by John Butler and Matt Rule. And he actually earlier this month announced a top 5 that, of course, didn't include Nebraska because Nebraska hadn't offered, and had plans to commit on December 1st. And now he's reconsidering those plans, reconsidering, whether he wants to make an early commitment, reconsidering his top 5. I think Nebraska's given him a good bit to think about. And so we'll see what happens there. That's going to be a fluid situation. Even if he does ultimately commit on December 1st to one of those other programs, Clemson's involved, Indiana's involved, Notre Dame's involved. Even if he commits, I think Nebraska's given enough to think that they have some staying power in that recruitment. And that's one to keep an eye on as a potential flip down the line if he does end up making an early commitment. But it is an interesting one. I thought that was an interesting development for Nebraska, not only to get him in town right before he plans to commit, but to kind of make him think. He was pretty set on committing, and usually for 2026, you announce these early decision dates because you know where you want to go and you have an idea of what you want and what you're looking for in the school. And the school's done a really good job in recruiting him. And instead, Nebraska was able to kind of get him thinking, which is always a positive. And despite the poor play from the secondary, I think John Butler, his vision for the secondary and kind of his background and his history with defensive backs continues to resonate with high school recruits. And I think most recognize that Butler doesn't really have his guys in there just yet. And, the youth influx is coming to that secondary. And ideally down the line, they'll be playing better football. Nebraska also had a good group of offensive linemen on campus. Malakai Lee, a 2026 four-star offensive tackle. I'd argue he's the second most important offensive tackle prospect behind Jackson Cantwell, the number 1 player in the country in 2026 for Nebraska. Out of Kamehameha High School out in Kauai, same high school that Donovan Raiola played at way back in the day. And one that I think Nebraska's got a chance there. Battling Oregon, battling Michigan, the who's who of college football. And that's not going to be easy, but I think Raiola's connection there, getting him back on campus, he's every bit of 6'7", 310. Like, he's a guy that walking along the sideline just does not look like a high school football player, much less a high school junior, kind of insane to think that guy walking around is 16 years old. But they also had Breck Kolojay, a 4-star offensive guard from IMG Academy. Kolojay originally hails from Colorado. He does some hunting in Nebraska, so he's got some familiarity with the state. Recently announced a top schools list that included Nebraska, and I think Nebraska's in good position there. Just have to keep chipping away. I think, he's got some national offers. I think, got to keep an eye on Colorado with the momentum they have to get him back and keep him, quote unquote, home. But Nebraska's done a good job there too, and I'd keep an eye on Nebraska there. A couple other offensive linemen in town that don't really have offers or they're monitoring. But yeah, looking ahead to 26, I think Nebraska's really done a good job of getting ahead. I wrote up a couple weeks ago an offensive big board, and it's really starting to come into focus. You already have your 2026 quarterback committed in Dayton Raiola. You already have a 26 receiver in Devion Von Wilwitty committed. In you have a good board at running back. You've got Zephyr Walker out of Missouri. You have Brian Bonner out of California. You have Jordan Taylor out of St. Louis. And they continue offering more. Just this weekend, EJ Bartel offered a 2026 running back out of Charlotte, Christian out in Charlotte, North Carolina. So the board's expanding, but there's a short list of guys that Bartel's closing in on and that he's looking at running back in 2026. That 2026 wide receiver board is pretty big and expansive, and that's going to continue to change. Just depending on as Dana kind of gets his guys in town and starts to get a vision of what he wants at pass catcher and moving forward. So I would keep an eye, on just as those dominoes continue to fall and as Nebraska works to get ahead there. The 2026 offensive line board, obviously headlined by Jackson Cantwell, Malakai Lee. I think that's a group where Nebraska make a really big splash. Nebraska got a good opportunity to put together a really good offensive line board this week, in 2026. Another name I guess I forgot to mention him, should have in the weekend visitors. Kelvin Obot, Obot is his last name, from Idaho. Nebraska actually has two offensive line offers out in Idaho in 2026, one to Jase Tanner and one to Obot. And Tanner is one of their top offensive guard prospects. Obot's one of the top offensive tackle prospects, a guy that's fast rising up the rankings amidst his breakout junior season. I just keep an eye on him as a guy that Nebraska's done a really, really good job early on, and his recruitment's only continuing to grow as schools get eyes on his junior film. But Nebraska's positioned themselves in a really good spot early on, and it's largely because of Keith Williams, the effort he's put in. We saw Obot at Devaney for that Wisconsin-Nebraska volleyball game, and he was flanked by Williams. And I think Keith Williams doing a really good job there in keeping Nebraska at the top of Obot's mind, even as his recruitment kind of continues to grow. So yeah, I mean, like offensive line board, you have a really good opportunity. Flipping over to the defensive side, we talked about the linebacker room. The secondary room is really starting to come together. You're starting to see an idea of what John Butler wants. He likes length. He likes versatility. He likes ball hawks. So you have a good idea of what those DBs he's looking for are and who those DBs are. And then up front, the D line, I think that's an opportunity too. I think the names are still like it hasn't really come to focus just yet. But I think Knighton has an idea of what he wants for that room long term. And, with the group they put together in 2025, you have to feel good about what they can do in 2026 and beyond, just with the play of the unit and some of the guys he's gotten in and the opportunity for young guys to play. Nebraska rotates so much up front. I think the guys across the country take notice of that. So, as they're putting the finishing touches on this 25 class, obviously we'll have updates over at InsideNebraska.com and with the Recruiting Blitz next week to kind of set the table for signing day. And we'll also probably have, some commitment reactions as well, some potential flip reactions here on YouTube. But as we're closing the book on 2025. We're going to start looking ahead to the transfer portal and looking ahead to 2026. And I think Nebraska's done a really good job of, as much as they could of maintaining momentum and building momentum, even in the season where they're currently 6-5. But that'll do it for us here with the Recruiting Blitz show. Appreciate you all tuning in. Appreciate you sticking around, and happy Thanksgiving to you all out there. Y'all enjoy the week, and we'll be back on Monday or Tuesday next week with another episode.